Have you ever had a place that wasn't just a place? A place that was a feeling? A living, breathing scrapbook of your entire life? For me, that was my mother's beach house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't fancy. The white paint was always a little chipped, the wraparound porch a little warped from the salt air. But it was everything. This house, it was the smell of salt and old wood. It was the sound of my father's laughter echoing from a summer long, long ago. It was the feel of sun-warmed floorboards under my bare feet as a child. It was where I learned to swim, where I had my first kiss, where I held my mother's hand and promised her, after Dad was gone, that we would always be okay. It was her sanctuary. And it was mine. My mother, Eleanor, she was the heart of that house. A painter. Her soul was as wide and deep as the ocean she loved to paint. Even after the sickness started to steal little pieces of her, first a forgotten word, then a misplaced key, then the light in her eyes, some days, the house grounded her. Here, she was still Eleanor. Here, the memories were so strong, they could almost fight off the fog. And then there was my sister, Chloe. Chloe. 2 years younger. The city girl. She never saw the magic in the chipped paint. All she saw was dollar signs. To her, the beach house was just a decaying asset. A burden. Prime real estate, she'd say, her voice like the clink of ice in a glass. Just sitting here, draining money. She lived 3 hours away in her sleek, steel and glass apartment, a world away from our sun-bleached, memory-soaked haven. She'd visit, but her visits felt like inspections. She'd run a finger over the dusty mantelpiece and sigh. She'd talk about property values and property taxes, her words feeling like a violation in a house that was built on love. I moved into the guest house after Dad died, to be close to Mom. I became her caretaker, her anchor. I watched over her, and she, in her way, watched over me. We had a rhythm, a peace. And we both knew, without ever saying it, that Chloe was the storm cloud on our horizon. The big confrontation happened on a Tuesday. I remember because the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, a cruel contrast to what was coming. Chloe's car crunched up the shell driveway, a sound that always made my mother flinch. She wasn't due for a visit. She walked in, not with a hello, but with a folder. She placed it on the kitchen table, right on top of one of Mom's half-finished watercolors of the dunes. "Alex, Mom," she said, a tight, triumphant smile on her face. "We need to talk. It's time." My mother looked up, her eyes confused. "Time for what, dear?" Chloe's smile didn't reach her eyes. "To be practical. To stop being sentimental about a pile of wood. I've found a buyer. A fantastic offer. We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. "I've sold your beach house. Not we. Not the family." My mother's face crumpled. It was like watching a sandcastle dissolve under a wave. The light in her eyes, the little bit that was left, just went out. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, a cold so deep it burned. "You did what?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's for the best, Alex," she said, her voice crisp, businesslike. "The money will set Mom up in a nice facility. And you can finally get a real life. A real life." As if protecting our mother's last shred of happiness wasn't a real life. As if preserving our family's soul was just a hobby. I looked at my sister. I saw no regret. No sadness. Just the cool, calculated satisfaction of a deal well done. In that moment, the sister I grew up with, the one I built sandcastles with, was gone. Replaced by a stranger. A betrayer. And as I stood there, holding my trembling mother, watching Chloe tap the sale papers with her perfectly manicured finger, I made a silent promise. A vow. She thought she had one. She thought she had taken everything. But what she didn't know was, the house had one last secret. And I was going to use it to destroy her perfect little world. The night after Chloe dropped her bomb, the house felt different. It was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a fortress under siege. The familiar creaks and groans sounded like warnings. My mother retreated into herself. She sat by the window, staring at the moonlit ocean, her paintbrush still. She was a ghost in her own home. And I was filled with a quiet, simmering rage. But rage without a plan is just noise. I needed a weapon. I remembered something. A story my father told me when I was maybe 10 years old. We were up in the attic, looking for old Christmas decorations. He'd pointed to a specific floorboard, warped and darker than the others, near the big, round window that faced the sea. "Your great-grandfather built this place, Alex," he'd said, his voice low and conspiratorial. He was a smart man. Didn't trust banks, especially after the Great Depression. He always said a man's real security shouldn't be in a ledger book, but in his own hands. He'd tapped that floorboard with his foot. He called this his storm cellar. For financial hurricanes. Remember that, son. Just in case. As a kid, I'd imagined treasure chests and gold coins. As I grew up, I'd forgotten about it, dismissed it as one of Dad's tall tales. But that night, with Chloe's betrayal fresh and the future of this house hanging by a thread, that memory came rushing back. The storm cellar. The financial hurricane was here. I waited until my mother was asleep. The attic was a place of shadows and memories. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. My heart was pounding, a drumbeat of desperate hope. I moved past trunks of old clothes, past my mother's discarded canvases, to the round window. And there it was. That dark, warped floorboard. My hands were trembling as I pried at its edge with an old screwdriver. It resisted at first, then gave way with a groan. I lifted it. Beneath it wasn't dirt, but a hollow space. And inside that space wasn't a chest of gold coins. It was a metal box. Heavy, rusted at the edges. I carried it down to my room in the guest house, my pulse thrumming in my ears. This was it. The house's last secret. I broke the small, rusty lock with a hammer. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. Not exactly. There were documents. Yellowed, brittle papers. Deeds. Land surveys. And a single, leather-bound journal. But it was one document, folded carefully at the bottom, that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the last will and testament of my great-grandfather, Alistair Munro. A will that no one in our family, not my father, not my mother, and certainly not Chloe, knew existed. And as I read it, by the dim light of my desk lamp, the world shifted. The entire foundation of our family, of Chloe's cold-hearted sale, began to crack. The will stated, in clear, unshakable legal language, that the beach house and the land it stood on could never be sold outside the direct bloodline of Alistair Munro. It was to be passed down, generation to generation, a perpetual sanctuary. It could be willed to a child, but it could never be put on the open market. If there were no direct descendants, it would be donated to the town as a historical landmark. Chloe hadn't just betrayed me and our mother. She had violated the most sacred wish of the man who built our legacy. And according to this document, she had no legal right to do what she had done. A slow, cold smile spread across my face for the first time in days. This wasn't just a hidden deed. This was a declaration of war. And I had just been handed the ultimate weapon. But I couldn't just wave it in her face. No. That would be too easy. She needed to feel it. She needed to be at the very brink of her victory, to taste it, before I pulled the rug out from under her entire world. This wasn't just about stopping the sale anymore. This was about justice. The next morning, I acted normal. Defeated. When Chloe came over to help pack, I didn't meet her eyes. I shuffled around, my shoulders slumped, the picture of a broken man. "It's for the best, Alex," she said again, this time with a hint of pity that made my skin crawl. "You'll see. We'll get Mom the care she needs. You can buy a nice little condo." I just nodded, mumbling something about the memories. I was an actor in my own life, and my performance was Oscar-worthy. Inside, I was a coiled spring. As soon as she left, I sprang into action. But I couldn't use just any lawyer. Chloe was sharp, connected. She'd smell a trap if I used a local firm. I needed a ghost. A legal ninja. I remembered an old college friend, Marcus. We'd been roommates. He was the smartest, most ruthlessly brilliant person I'd ever met. He'd gone into law and, last I heard, was a feared corporate litigator in the city, a guy who specialized in destroying other companies' plans. He was expensive, intimidating, and, most importantly, he owed me a favor. I called him from a payphone in the next town over. No traces. "Marcus," I said when he answered. "It's Alex. From college. I need a wolf." He listened silently as I laid it out. The house. My mother's illness. Chloe's betrayal. The hidden will. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Alex," he said, his voice a low, smooth rumble. "This is delicious. This is the kind of clean, righteous destruction I live for. Email me scans of everything. Don't tell a soul. I'll be the ghost in your machine." Within hours, he'd confirmed it. The will was ironclad. It had been properly witnessed and notarized. It had never been superseded because no one knew it existed. The buyer Chloe had found, a big development company that wanted to tear down our house and build a row of soulless condos, had no legal claim. The sale was null and void. But Marcus had a better idea. A crueler, more perfect idea. "We don't stop it yet," he said, his voice coldly analytical. "Let the sale proceed to the very last second. Let your sister invest her own emotions, her own sense of victory, into this. Let her maybe even spend the money in her head. Then, at the closing table, when the pen is in her hand, we strike. We don't just invalidate the sale. We sue the development company for attempted acquisition of a protected property under false pretenses. And we sue your sister for fraudulent representation." My jaw dropped. "Sue Chloe. It's the only way to make it real, Alex," Marcus said. "A legal slap on the wrist she'll forget. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit that threatens to bankrupt her. That, she will feel. That will break her. It's not about the money. It's about sending a message. She tried to sell a legacy that wasn't hers to sell. The law will make her pay, literally, for that arrogance." It was brutal. It was ruthless. It was perfect. The plan was set. I would play my part, the grieving, helpless son. I would let Chloe pack up our mother's life. I would let her give away the furniture, box up the paintings. I would let her believe she had one. I would feed her confidence until it became her arrogance. And all the while, Marcus was working in the shadows, preparing the legal tsunami that would wash it all away. He contacted the development company, not as my lawyer, but as a mysterious third party, hinting at title irregularities. He started to plant seeds of doubt, making them nervous. He was a puppeteer, and he was tightening the strings. I watched Chloe. I saw the spring in her step. I heard her on the phone, talking about liquidating the past. She was so sure. So utterly confident. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was already crumbling. The revenge wasn't coming with a shout. It was coming with the quiet, unstoppable force of the law. And it was going to destroy her. The following week was the longest of my life. It was a bizarre, out-of-body experience. I was living in two realities at once. In one, I was the sad brother, helping to dismantle the very heart of our family. In the other, I was a general, preparing for a battle only I knew was coming. We started packing up the main house. Each box felt like a coffin for a memory. Wrapping my mother's ceramic mugs in newspaper. Taking down the faded photos from the hallway, Dad holding a giant fish, Chloe and I as gap-toothed kids building a sandcastle, Mom laughing with a paint-splattered apron. Chloe was efficient, clinical. "We can sell this online," she'd say, holding one of Mom's vintage vases. "This is just junk," she'd declare, tossing a box of my old childhood books into a donate pile. I didn't argue. I just quietly rescued what I could, moving things to the guest house when she wasn't looking. I saved every one of my mother's paintings. Those, she couldn't have. The hardest part was my mother. Some days, she was lucid. She'd wander into a room we were packing and her face would fill with panic. "What's happening? Why are you taking my things?" she'd cry, her voice small and scared. Chloe would pat her arm. "It's okay, Mom. We're just tidying up. We're moving to a nicer place." Those lies felt like physical blows. I'd have to leave the room, my hands clenched into fists, whispering Marcus's updates to myself like a mantra. Just a little longer. Hold on. On her good days, Mom was quiet, but present. She'd sit with me on the porch in the evenings, a blanket over her knees, and watch the ocean. He's still here, you know, she said to me one evening, her voice clear as a bell. Who, Mom? Your father. In the wood. In the sea air. This house, it holds him. It holds all of us. It's our story, Alex. She turned to me, her eyes piercingly aware. Don't ever let our story be erased. A lump formed in my throat so large I could barely breathe. I took her hand. I won't, Mom. I promise. In that moment, any lingering doubt I had about our brutal plan vanished. This was no longer just about revenge against Chloe. This was a vow. A promise to my mother. A duty to my father and my great-grandfather. I was the guardian of this story. And I would protect it with everything I had. Meanwhile, Marcus's plan was working perfectly. He called me, his voice buzzing with excitement. The developers are getting twitchy. My anonymous tips have them questioning everything. They've started their own title search, which will lead them right to the old, public records, which show no will. They'll think it's a false alarm. Their confidence will snap back, harder than before. It's called the boomerang effect. They'll be more committed than ever to close the deal quickly, before any other rumors surface. He paused. And Alex? I've drawn up the lawsuit. It's a masterpiece. I'm naming both the development company and Chloe personally for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress on your mother. The damages I'm asking for are significant. Enough to wipe out Chloe's savings and then some. The closing was set for Friday, at 10 a.m., at a title company in the city. Chloe was giddy. She bought a new suit for the occasion. She talked about the shopping she was going to do, the vacation she was going to take. The night before the closing, she came to the guest house. She actually hugged me. It was stiff and awkward. Thank you for finally being reasonable, Alex, she said. Tomorrow, it all becomes official. A fresh start for everyone. I looked at her, my face a mask of calm. Inside, a storm was raging. Yes, Chloe, I said, my voice quiet. Tomorrow, everything becomes official. She smiled, mistaking my meaning entirely. She turned and walked back to the main house, the soon-to-be former owner of a legacy she never understood. I stood there for a long time, watching the moon trace a silver path across the dark water. The calm before the storm. And I was the storm. The title office was everything I hated. Sterile. Beige. The air smelled of stale coffee and photocopier toner. It was the absolute opposite of our beach house. Chloe sat at a large, polished table, looking like she owned the world in her new navy blue suit. Next to her were two men in sharp, expensive suits, the representatives from the development company, Ocean View Estates. They had smug, satisfied smiles. They thought they were about to get a steal. I sat in the corner, away from the table, dressed in a simple, old sweater and jeans. I was a spectator. A ghost. I wanted them to forget I was even there. The title agent, a bored-looking woman with glasses, started shuffling papers. Okay, folks, we're just about ready. Just need the final signatures from the seller, Ms. Chloe Monroe, and we can release the funds. Chloe beamed. She picked up the fancy pen laid out for her. It was a moment of pure triumph for her. This was the pinnacle of her practicality. The erasure of our past, converted into a tidy sum in her bank account. Before a single signature is placed on that document, a voice said from the doorway, calm and authoritative. Everyone jumped. I didn't. I just watched. It was Marcus. He looked like a force of nature. He wore a lawyer's suit, but it was his armor. He carried a simple leather briefcase. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the developers. And who are you? One of the developers, a Mr. Davison, snapped, his smile vanishing. My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent the legal interests of Alistair Monroe's estate, he said, his voice filling the small room. He walked calmly to the table and placed his briefcase down with a soft, definitive thud. Chloe looked from Marcus to me, confusion and dawning anger on her face. Alex, what is this? What is he talking about? I said nothing. I just kept my gaze steady on Marcus's performance. Marcus opened his briefcase and slid a single, pristine document across the table toward Mr. Davison. It was a copy of the hidden will. This, Marcus said, is the last will and testament of Alistair Munro, dated 1955. It was discovered recently in the property he built, the very property you are attempting to purchase. Clause 4b, which I have highlighted for your convenience, clearly states that the property, known as Seabreeze, is to be held in perpetuity by the direct bloodline of Alistair Munro and is expressly forbidden from being sold on the open market. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Davison's face went from red to white. He scanned the document, his eyes widening. This is a forgery. This wasn't in the title search. It wasn't filed with the county because that was not a legal requirement at the time, and my client's great-grandfather valued his privacy, Marcus replied smoothly. But it is legally binding, as any judge will confirm. The sale you are about to conduct is invalid. Furthermore, he paused, letting the word hang in the air like a sword. You were made aware of potential title irregularities earlier this week through anonymous counsel. You chose to ignore those warnings and proceed. That constitutes bad faith. He then produced 2 more thick packets of paper. He slid one to Mr. Davison and one to Chloe, whose face was now a mask of utter shock and horror. This, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, is a lawsuit. We are suing Ocean View Estates for fraudulent acquisition and damages. And we are suing you, Ms. Munro, for fraudulent representation. You sold a property you had no legal right to sell, knowingly causing severe emotional distress to your incapacitated mother, the rightful beneficiary of the estate. Chloe looked down at the lawsuit. Her hands were trembling so violently the papers rattled. Her eyes scanned the number, the amount we were suing for. It was a number that could dismantle the life she had so carefully built. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. This can't be. Alex. She whirled on me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and terror. You knew. You did this. I finally stood up. I walked over to the table. I looked at my sister, not with anger, but with a deep, profound sadness. I protected our family, Chloe, I said, my voice low but clear. Something you were supposed to do. The developers were already on their feet, gathering their things, sputtering about their own lawyers. They shot Chloe a look of pure venom before storming out. The title agent just stared, stunned. Chloe was left alone at the big, polished table, the unsigned contract in front of her, the lawsuit resting on top of it like a tombstone. The pen was still in her hand. She looked at it, then at the papers, then at me. The triumph in her eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, devastating shock. She had reached the summit of her ambition, only to be pushed off the cliff. She was left completely, speechless. We didn't have to go to court. The threat was enough. Ocean View Estates, faced with a public, messy lawsuit they were guaranteed to lose, settled almost immediately. They paid a substantial, confidential sum to me, as the representative of my mother's estate, to make the whole thing go away. It was more than enough to pay for Mom's care for the rest of her life, and to restore the beach house to its former glory. But the real consequence, the real revenge, was what happened to Chloe. The lawsuit against her was the wrecking ball that destroyed her perfect life. She wasn't just financially liable, she was professionally ruined. News of the lawsuit, of her attempt to sell a protected family property out from under her sick mother, leaked. In her world of high-stakes business, reputation is everything. And hers was now mud. She lost her high-paying job. Her so-called friends, the ones who valued net worth over character, vanished. The boyfriend she was always trying to impress. He ghosted her. Her sleek apartment. She couldn't afford it anymore. She was exposed. Stripped of all the material things she valued above everything else. The very practicality she had preached had been her downfall. A month after the closing table disaster, she showed up at the beach house. It was a rainy afternoon. She looked small, defeated. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a raincoat. The arrogance was gone from her eyes. I was on the porch, sanding down a piece of the railing. I didn't stop when she walked up. She stood there for a minute, the rain pattering on the roof, before she spoke. The lawsuit, she began, her voice hoarse. You dropped it. I kept sanding. I did. Why? I finally looked at her. Because it was never about the money, Chloe. It was about you understanding. It was about you feeling the weight of what you tried to throw away. Tears welled in her eyes. They weren't the dramatic tears of a manipulator. They were the raw, honest tears of someone whose world had crumbled. I lost everything, Alex. My job. My friends. Everything. You traded everything for nothing, I said, not unkindly, but firmly. You had a family. You had a history. You had a soul. And you tried to sell it for a bigger bank account. Now you have neither. She broke down then, sobbing on the porch steps of the house she tried to sell. I let her cry. The rain washed over her, and it felt like the world was cleansing itself of her poison. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask to come back. After her tears were spent, she just stood up, wiped her face, and walked back to her car without another word. She moved to another state, I heard later. Started over from scratch. A humbler life. Maybe, just maybe, a better one. The revenge was complete. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. But it was absolute. I had used the very system she worshipped, the law, money, strategy, to show her the emptiness of her own values. I had destroyed the life she built on a foundation of sand, while I secured the one built on solid rock and generations of love. Section 7. Restoring the Heart of Seabreeze. Narrator, Alex. With the settlement money, I began the true work, not destruction, but restoration. I hired a team of carpenters who respected old homes. We repaired the warped porch. We scraped and painted the chipped siding, returning it to its brilliant white. We fixed the loose shutter that whistled in the wind. But the most important restoration wasn't to the house, it was to my mother. I brought her back from the guest house to the main house. I had kept her bedroom exactly as it was. I had hung her paintings back on the walls. I set up her easel by the big living room window, with a fresh canvas and new tubes of paint. The day she came back, she was quiet. She walked slowly through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the familiar furniture, the saved photographs. She stopped in front of her easel. She looked out the window at the ocean, then back at the empty canvas. She picked up a brush. She didn't paint that day. But she held it. And for the first time in months, a tiny, peaceful smile touched her lips. She was home. The fog of her illness was still there, it would always be there, but here, in this place, she could find islands of clarity. Islands of peace. I never told her about the legal battle with Chloe. In her lucid moments, she would sometimes ask, "Where is Chloe? Is she okay?" I would just hold her hand and say, "She's on her own path, Mom. But we're here. We're safe. The house is safe." And that was enough for her. It was enough for me. The beach house was no longer just a memory. It was a living thing again. It was filled with the smell of paint and sawdust and the sea. It was filled with the sound of my mother's soft humming. It was a fortress that had been tested, attacked, and had stood strong. I had kept my promise. To my father. To my great-grandfather. To my mother. Our story would not be erased. It would continue, written in the salt air and the sturdy, loving bones of this house. Seabreeze was saved. Not just the building, but its heart. So, what is the moral of this story? Was I right to destroy my sister's life to save my mother's? This wasn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It was a story about values. About what we choose to hold sacred. For Chloe, it was money, status, and a cold, hard version of progress. For me, it was memory, family, and love. My revenge wasn't about hatred. It was about love. A fierce, protective, uncompromising love for my mother and for the home that made us who we are. I didn't set out to ruin Chloe. I set out to stop her. The ruin was a consequence of her own choices, of the brittle world she had chosen to build for herself. Betrayal, it's a poison. It doesn't just harm the one who is betrayed, it corrodes the soul of the betrayer. Chloe was already lost long before she walked in with that sale agreement. I just showed her the reflection of what she had become. And justice. Sometimes, justice isn't a courtroom. It's a quiet victory. It's the ability to sit on a repaired porch with your mother, watching the sunset paint the sky, knowing you defended what was right. It's the peace that comes from knowing some things are more valuable than money. The tide goes out, taking things with it. Sometimes it takes sandcastles. Sometimes it takes relationships. Sometimes it takes memories. But the tide always comes back in. It brings new sand, new shells, new beginnings. I look at this house now, strong and bright against the shore. I look at my mother, her hand resting peacefully on her canvas. The tide took my sister from our lives. But it brought back our home. It brought back our peace. And in the end, that was the only victory that ever mattered.